Welcome back to Ben's Book Summaries for another deep dive.
Oh, I love a good deep dive.
Me too. And today we're going to be diving deep into the pleasure trap, mastering the hidden force that undermines health and happiness.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. I'm already hooked.
It's a really fascinating book that challenges a lot of conventional thinking about health and happiness.
So tell me more about this pleasure trap. What exactly is it?
Well, the book argues that there's this hidden force that often steers us toward choices that feel good in the moment,
Okay, I'm listening.
but might actually be detrimental to our health and happiness in the long run.
That makes sense. We've all been there, right? Giving into those temptations that we know aren't really good for us.
Exactly. And the authors, Dr. Douglas Lisle and Dr. Alan Goldhamer, they really break down the science behind why we do this.
So who are these guys? What's their background?
Well, Dr. Lisle is a psychologist specializing in evolutionary psychology.
Okay, interesting.
And Dr. Goldhamer is a chiropractor and a fasting specialist who runs the True North Health Center.
So they come from pretty different backgrounds, but they've teamed up to write this book together.
Yeah, and it was actually published back in 2003.
Oh, wow. So it's been around for a while.
It has, and it's gained quite a following over the years. It's even been praised by some big names in the health and nutrition world.
Like who?
Well, folks like Dr. John McDougall and Dr. T. Colin Campbell have spoken highly of the book.
Oh, wow. Those are some heavy hitters in the plant-based world.
Exactly, so it definitely has some credibility behind it.
Okay, I'm even more intrigued now. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are some of the key concepts in the book?
One of the foundational ideas is that every living organism, including us humans, is essentially designed for survival and reproduction, or to be more precise, the replication of its genes.
Right. That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah, and it's not something we consciously think about, but it's this powerful underlying drive that influences a lot of our actions.
So how does this primal drive connect to our modern-day choices, especially those that might not be so healthy?
Well, the book introduces this concept called the motivational triad, which is basically the interplay of three powerful instincts: seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and conserving energy.
Okay, I can see how those instincts would have been essential for survival back in the day.
Absolutely. But the authors argue that in our modern environment, these instincts can sometimes lead us astray
How so?
because they can create what they call pleasure traps. These are situations where our natural instincts drive us towards choices that feel good in the moment, but ultimately have negative long-term consequences.
That's a really interesting concept. Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about those irresistible magic foods, highly processed, calorie-dense foods that are engineered to hijack our natural satiation mechanism.
Oh, yeah, those foods that you just can't stop eating once you start.
Exactly. Our bodies are incredibly smart. They have built-in systems that tell us when we've had enough food.
Right, like feeling full and satisfied.
But these magic foods, they kind of mess with those signals.
So we end up overeating without even realizing it.
Exactly. And the book highlights this discrepancy with a really striking example. A natural potato has about 500 calories per pound.
Okay, that doesn't sound too bad.
But those tempting potato chips, they pack a whopping 2,500 calories per pound.
Wow, that's a huge difference. No wonder we can polish off a whole bag without even thinking twice.
It's like our brains are tricked into thinking we're getting more bang for our buck, even though it comes at the expense of our health.
So it's not just about willpower, it's about understanding these deeper biological mechanisms at play.
Exactly. And that's what the book really delves into.
Fascinating. So this pleasure trap, it can show up in our food choices, but does it impact other areas of our lives as well?
Definitely. The authors argue that it can also affect our healthcare choices.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, they point out that modern medicine often focuses more on symptom relief than addressing the root causes of illness.
Okay, I can see how that could be a problem. It's like putting a bandage on a wound without actually cleaning it first.
That's a great analogy. And they make a distinction between what they call the pain relief goal and the healing goal.
So what's the difference?
The pain relief goal is about alleviating symptoms as quickly as possible, which is important, of course.
Especially in emergency situations.
Absolutely. But they argue that when it comes to chronic diseases, the focus should shift to the healing goal, which means identifying and addressing the underlying causes of those diseases.
That makes sense. But isn't that what modern medicine is supposed to do?
Ideally, yes, but they suggest that the current system often falls short in this area with an over-reliance on medication to manage symptoms rather than addressing the root causes.
That's something to think about. So they're not anti-medicine, but they're advocating for a more holistic approach that takes into account the whole person.
Exactly. They even use this fascinating historical anecdote to illustrate their point, the story of Ignaz Semmelweis.
Who's that?
He was a doctor back in the 1800s who suggested that doctors should wash their hands to reduce infections.
Wait, doctors weren't washing their hands back then.
It might sound crazy now, but it was a pretty radical idea at the time.
Wow, that's hard to believe.
And the point they're making is that new ideas often face resistance, even when they're backed by evidence.
And they're suggesting that something similar is happening today with the over-reliance on medication for chronic conditions.
Exactly. And they provide some pretty sobering statistics to back up their claims.
Like what?
Well, they cite a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association that suggests that side effects from medication could be the sixth leading cause of death in the United States.
Wow, that's a really scary thought.
It is, and it really highlights the importance of carefully considering the risks and benefits of any medical intervention.
Absolutely. So we've got this motivational triad that can lead us into pleasure traps with both food and healthcare choices. But I'm guessing the book doesn't just point out the problem, right? It offers solutions too.
You're absolutely right. And that's what we'll dive into next time. We'll explore some of the strategies they offer for breaking free from these pleasure traps and reclaiming our true north.
I can't wait. This is all so fascinating.
It is, isn't it? It really makes you think about the choices we make every day and the forces that are influencing those choices.
And how we can become more conscious and deliberate in those choices.
Exactly. And that's what the pleasure trap is all about, empowering us to take control of our health and happiness.
So where do we go from here? How do we actually start making those more conscious and deliberate choices?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And the book offers some really interesting and practical advice.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so one of the key strategies they talk about is what they call the seam strategy.
The seam strategy. I've never heard of that before. What is it?
It's basically a way to navigate those tricky social situations where you're feeling pressured to indulge in something you'd rather avoid.
Oh yeah, those situations are the worst. Like when you're at a party and everyone's offering you cake and you're trying to stick to your healthy eating plan.
I know, it's so hard to say no, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you don't want to offend anyone or make a big deal about it.
And it's not just about food either. It could be anything, pressure to drink alcohol, stay out late, or whatever it might be that you're trying to avoid.
Exactly. So the seam strategy is a really subtle but effective way to deflect that pressure without making it a big confrontation.
I'm all ears. Tell me more.
Okay, so imagine you're at that party and someone offers you a piece of cake. Instead of saying, no thanks, I'm trying to eat healthy, which can sometimes make people feel like you're judging them or their choices.
Right. Or it can invite unwanted attention and questions.
Exactly. So with the seam strategy, you might say something like, oh, that looks delicious, but it seems to be working for me to avoid sugar right now.
Ooh, I like that. It's subtle, it's non-confrontational, and it doesn't invite further discussion.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that you don't even have to be completely truthful.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, maybe you're not actually avoiding sugar for any specific reason. Maybe you just don't feel like cake at that moment.
So it's more about having a go-to phrase that allows you to politely decline without feeling pressured to explain yourself.
Exactly. It's a way to take control of the situation without making it awkward or confrontational.
Brilliant. I'm definitely adding that to my toolbox of social strategies.
And that reminds me of another key point the book makes about social pressure. The authors bring up the famous Milgram experiment to illustrate just how susceptible we are to social influence.
Oh yeah, the Milgram experiment, wasn't that the one where people were told to administer electric shocks to someone else?
That's the one. And the really shocking part, pun intended, haha, is that over 60% of the participants in the experiment were willing to administer what they believed to be potentially lethal shocks simply because an authority figure told them to do so.
Wow, that's crazy. It just goes to show how powerful social pressure can be.
Exactly. And the book uses this experiment to highlight how important it is to be prepared for these integrity crises, especially when it comes to our health. We need to have strategies in place for navigating these situations without compromising our well-being.
I'm starting to see a theme here. It's all about being proactive and having a plan.
You got it. And that leads us to another really interesting concept from the book, The Myths of Moderation.
The myths of moderation. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, you know how everyone always talks about moderation being the key to a healthy lifestyle?
Yeah, everything in moderation, right?
That's the idea.
Yeah.
But the authors of The Pleasure Trap challenged that notion. They argue that when it comes to breaking free from those deeply ingrained pleasure traps, moderation can actually be counterproductive.
Wait, really? So you're saying that going cold turkey is more effective than easing into a healthier lifestyle?
That's precisely what they propose.
Mhm.
They suggest that by making multiple positive changes simultaneously, you're more likely to see and feel those benefits faster, which can be incredibly motivating.
I never thought about it that way. I've always been more of a gradual change kind of person.
I get it, and I think for some things, gradual change can be really effective. But when it comes to those deeply ingrained habits, especially those related to the pleasure trap, the authors argue that a more dramatic approach can be more successful.
So it's like ripping off a bandage, you get the discomfort over with quickly,
Hmm.
and then enjoy the feeling of relief and progress.
Exactly. And they point out that when you make those small, incremental changes, it can be hard to notice the overall impact on your health.
Right. Which can lead to discouragement and make you more likely to give up.
That's exactly it. So they advocate for a more radical approach, making several significant changes at once.
And their reasoning is that this will create a more noticeable and immediate impact, which can then fuel motivation and make it easier to stick with those changes.
Exactly. It's about creating a sense of momentum and seeing those tangible results that can keep you going.
That makes a lot of sense. So instead of just cutting back on sugar a little bit, they might suggest cutting it out completely, along with processed foods, and maybe adding in a regular exercise routine.
That's a great example. It's about creating a synergistic effect where all of those positive changes work together to create a more dramatic and noticeable shift in your overall well-being.
And that can then create a positive feedback loop where you're more motivated to continue making those healthy choices.
Exactly. It's about leveraging that initial momentum to create lasting change.
This is really making me rethink my whole approach to making changes. I've always been more of a slow and steady wins the race kind of person.
I totally get it. And I think there's a time and a place for that approach. But the pleasure trap really challenges us to consider whether that approach is always the most effective, especially when we're dealing with those deeply ingrained habits that are so hard to break.
And it makes sense, right? If we're constantly surrounded by temptation and constantly having to exert willpower, it's no wonder we get exhausted and give up.
Exactly. And that's why creating those supportive environments that we talked about earlier is so crucial. It's reducing the amount of willpower we need to rely on by making those healthy choices easier and more accessible.
So it's like setting ourselves up for success from the start.
Exactly. It's like tilting the scales in our favor. And it's not just about our physical environment either. It's also about our social environment.
Right, like surrounding ourselves with people who support our goals and who are making healthy choices themselves.
Exactly. It's about finding that tribe of like-minded individuals who can encourage and inspire us along the way.
Because let's face it, making these changes can be tough, especially when we're going against the grain of what's considered normal in our society.
I couldn't agree more. Having that support system can make all the difference.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders in your corner, reminding you why you started this journey in the first place and encouraging you to keep going.
And they also talk about the importance of self-compassion. They remind us that slip-ups and setbacks are part of the process. It's not about being perfect. It's about being kind to ourselves and learning from our experiences.
That's such an important point. We all make mistakes. We all have moments of weakness. It's what we do after those moments that really matters.
Exactly. It's about picking ourselves up, dusting ourselves off, and recommitting to our goals.
And remembering that every day is a new opportunity to make healthy choices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another really powerful concept from the book, the idea of reclaiming our true north.
Ah, yes, true north. We talked about that earlier. But I'm still a little fuzzy on what exactly it means.
Well, the authors describe true north as our innate wisdom, our internal compass that guides us towards what truly nourishes and sustains us.
So it's like our inner voice, that gut feeling that tells us what's right for us.
Exactly. They argue that we all have this inner knowing, but it can get clouded by external pressures, societal expectations, and those pesky pleasure traps we've been discussing.
So reclaiming our true north is about rediscovering that inner compass and learning to trust its guidance.
That's it. It's about tuning into our intuition, listening to our bodies, and aligning our choices with our deepest values and aspirations.
It's about recognizing that we have the wisdom within us to make choices that support our well-being.
Exactly. And that's a really empowering message.
It is. It's about taking ownership of our health and happiness and recognizing that we have the power to create the life we desire.
It's about becoming the CEOs of our own well-being.
I love that analogy. It's
Yeah.
about being proactive and making those deliberate choices that move us closer to our goals.
And it's about recognizing that this is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, twists and turns, and moments of doubt and frustration.
But by embracing the process, staying connected to our true north, and drawing strength from our support system, we can navigate those challenges and keep moving forward.
And the pleasure trap can serve as our trusty guidebook along the way, offering insights, strategies, and encouragement to help us stay the course.
It really is a valuable resource for anyone who's ready to break free from those unhealthy patterns and create a life that truly nourishes their mind, body, and spirit.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of nourishment, let's take a break and come back to explore some of the specific strategies the pleasure trap offers for creating a healthier and happier lifestyle.
So, are you ready to unpack some of these strategies for creating a healthier and happier lifestyle?
Absolutely. I'm all ears. What specific advice do Lisle and Goldhamer offer?
Well, one of the things they emphasize is the importance of mindful eating. It's about paying attention to our food and really savoring each bite.
So not just scarfing down our food while we're checking email or scrolling through social media.
Exactly. It's about being present with our food and noticing the flavors, textures, and aromas.
That makes sense. It's about slowing down and really appreciating the experience of eating.
Exactly. And it's also about tuning into our body's signals of hunger and fullness.
So eating when we're actually hungry and stopping when we're satisfied, rather than just eating out of habit or boredom or because the food is there.
Right. It's about reconnecting with those natural cues that our bodies give us.
That's a really important point. I think a lot of us have lost touch with those cues.
I agree. And it's not just about what we eat, it's also about how we eat. They talk about creating a relaxing and enjoyable mealtime environment.
So like dimming the lights, putting on some music, and actually sitting down at a table to eat rather than just grabbing something on the go.
Exactly. It's about making mealtime a more mindful and pleasurable experience.
I love that. It's about treating our meals with respect and giving them the attention they deserve.
Right. And it's also about being kind to ourselves. If we slip up and overeat or make a choice we're not happy with, it's not the end of the world.
It's about learning from those experiences and moving forward without judgment.
Exactly. They encourage us to view setbacks as opportunities for growth and learning, and to focus on progress, not perfection.
And that brings us to another key strategy. They discuss the power of self-care.
Oh, yes, self-care is so important, but it often gets pushed aside in our busy
It
lives.
does, doesn't it? But the authors of The Pleasure Trap really emphasize the importance of prioritizing self-care as part of a healthy lifestyle.
So, what kind of self-care practices do they recommend?
Well, they talk about a wide range of practices, including things like getting enough sleep, managing stress, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, and pursuing hobbies and activities that bring us joy.
Those are all great ideas, but how do we actually make time for all of that when we're already so busy?
That's a great question, and they acknowledge that it's not always easy. But they encourage us to view self-care not as a luxury, but as a necessity.
It's an investment in our well-being.
Exactly. And they suggest that even small acts of self-care can make a big difference.
Like taking a few minutes to meditate or read a book or go for a walk.
Exactly. It's about finding those little pockets of time throughout the day to nourish ourselves and recharge our batteries.
And it's about being intentional with our time and making choices that support our well-being.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the most powerful forms of self-care, in my opinion, is connecting with nature.
Oh, I totally agree. There's something so grounding and rejuvenating about spending time outdoors.
Isn't there? The authors of The Pleasure Trap actually talk about the concept of nature deficit disorder, which is the idea that many of us are spending less and less time in nature, and that's having a negative impact on our health and happiness.
That makes sense. We're so plugged into technology these days that we often forget to unplug and connect with the natural world.
Exactly. So they encourage us to make a conscious effort to spend time in nature, whether it's going for a hike, gardening, or simply sitting under a tree and listening to the birds sing.
And those moments in nature don't have to be elaborate or time-consuming. It's about finding those little opportunities to connect with the natural world and reap the benefits.
Right. And speaking of connecting, they also emphasize the importance of social connection and building strong relationships.
That's so important for our well-being. Humans are social creatures by nature. We thrive on connection.
And yet so many of us are feeling lonely and isolated these days.
It's true. And the authors of The Pleasure Trap talk about how social isolation can actually be detrimental to our health. It can increase our risk of chronic diseases and even shorten our lifespan.
Wow, that's pretty serious.
It is. And that's why they encourage us to prioritize our relationships and make an effort to connect with others.
So, like spending quality time with loved ones, joining social groups, volunteering in our communities, or simply reaching out to a friend we haven't spoken to in a while.
Exactly. It's about making those connections a priority and nurturing those relationships that bring us joy and support.
And I love how they emphasize the importance of finding our tribe, those people who share our values and who support our journey toward greater well-being.
It's so much easier to make healthy choices when we're surrounded by people who are doing the same.
And it's so much more fun. It's like having a team of cheerleaders in our corner, encouraging us to keep going.
And speaking of encouragement, they also talk about the importance of being our own best cheerleaders.
That's such an important point. It's about cultivating that inner voice of compassion and self-love.
Exactly. Instead of beating ourselves up when we make a mistake, we can choose to offer ourselves words of kindness and encouragement.
And to celebrate our successes, no matter how small they might seem.
Yes, it's about acknowledging our efforts and appreciating how far we've come.
And remembering that this is a journey, not a destination.
Beautifully said. And The Pleasure Trap is a wonderful guidebook for anyone who's ready to embark on this journey toward greater health, happiness, and fulfillment.
It really is a game changer, and I highly recommend it to our listeners.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into The Pleasure Trap. It's been an incredible conversation filled with so many insights and practical strategies for creating a healthier and happier life.
I couldn't agree more. It's been a pleasure exploring this book with you.
Likewise. And a huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey.
We hope you found this episode informative and inspiring, and that you'll join us again next time for another deep dive into a book that's transforming the way we think about health and happiness. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep striving to live your best life.